Well, hello and welcome to Rosie's Preserving School, and we are today doing a session on preserving for beginners, and this is aimed at people who've never preserved anything and would like to, hopefully. And it may be the case that you've had a go at some preserves, but you just want to sort of cover the ground and fill in the gaps that you may or may not have. So it's appropriate for everybody. And as I always say, you know, we all learn as we go along, me included. So I read something, actually. I put it in our Preserving School Facebook group today because it just, well, yesterday, because it just struck me. There was this saying that you don't need to be perfect, you just need to start. And preserving's like that, really. People sort of think it's over there and they might do it sometime. And really, I think the people who have got on with it and had a go are now hooked, and you know, just wonder why they waited so long. We're going to make some raspberry jam a bit later on, and some people are going to cook along with me at home, so that's absolutely fine. But I wanted to go over, it may be a recap for some of you, but I wanted to go over the preservation of food, why we do it, how we do it, and how it's come about, because I think it's important to take it on board and to understand what you're doing. It's kind of simple to say, oh, I've got some fruit in the freezer and I just want to make a bit of jam. But I think it's helpful if you know the backstory. And then when people challenge you, as they challenge me every day, about the ingredients and the sugar and everything else, you'll have some information that you know, you can rely on, which is always helpful, I think, for your confidence. It is for me, because I still find it difficult when people batter me about sugar, and I just know in my head that it's all fine. So the preservation of food, what we're talking about is the preservation of food at ambient temperature. So no freezing, no refrigeration. This is preserving your food so that you can store it on a shelf somewhere, or in boxes under the spare bed, or whatever you do, wherever it has to be. It might be out in the shed, you know. It isn't involving, as a means of storage, refrigeration and freezing. They're both costly. If you're going to freeze things long term, then you're going to incur an extra cost over and above your preparation and your ingredients. And also, freezing really for longer than a year isn't really very successful, because the food does start to deteriorate. And most of the things that we make, you can keep for years. People don't believe me, but you can. So now, it first came about in Stone Age times. People seem to think it sort of started in the Middle Ages, or their great grandma or somebody, you know, but from Stone Age times is when the preservation of food at ambient temperature was first developed. People had been, up until that point, hunter-gatherers. That's what they did. They hunted and gathered. I mean, there weren't any 9-to-5 jobs or anything like that. People were just staying alive, and that took up all of their time. And that's worth holding on to, that thought, in these sort of difficult times that we face at the moment. And bit by bit, they noticed that the conditions in which they lived affected their food. And the preservation of food that I'm talking about comes about because moisture, the moisture content of what you want to preserve is lowered. That's it. That's the preservation of food. And it's so simple, yet we're kind of knee deep in preservatives and all the things on the backs of packets. If you simply reduce the moisture, you can keep food for much longer than if you left it just in its original state. So an example of that is dried herbs, of course. They are just dried. So most of their moisture is removed, and they will keep, as we know, those of us who aren't efficient at turning out our herb and spice stores, they will keep for years and years. They might not be very nice to use in the end because they've gone a horrible brown colour and lost a lot of their kind of oils that give them their flavour and so on. But nevertheless, they are still not harmful to eat. So you can, that's the beginning, the dried. So if the Stone Age tribes had killed something to eat and they cut it all up, because of the marauding animals, they would hang it up in where they were living, in a cave most likely. And by just hanging it up in the air, it would dry. And they would notice that that meat would keep for longer. And similarly, berries and things like that, they could either dry them, or honey was used and eaten just as we like sweet things today, and so did they. So the berries that they put into honey kept indefinitely. There are examples now of the pyramids being opened, and there's pots that were offerings for the gods on the journey to the greater life, which were filled with honey and berries, and they're over 2,000 years old, still in a fit state to eat now. I don't mean then, I mean now, which is extraordinary. So they began to realize that they could manipulate their food, they could control it a bit more, and that meant they weren't always moving on. They could stay put, they could make their stores last longer. And over time, it led to the first farming, the first communities, the first socializing. Instead of just head down hunting and gathering and sort of batting people out of the way to get to the best harvests, they started to cooperate and to work as a community. And that was because the preservation of their food was at the center of that. And I think that is just such a powerful thing that we've completely lost sight of today. Everything's immediate, everything must be there, everything must be available, whether or not it's any good for us. They were eating a pure diet of meat and berries and honey, and once they started farming and started growing grains and things like that, the whole picture changed. And okay, this isn't all done in a couple of months, it's over years and years and years, but nevertheless the pivotal point was the preservation of their food, and we would do well to remember that. And these skills that they started to develop, that have fed forward through the thousands of years, we're very happy now to put to one side and say, oh no, I'll go to Sainsbury's and fill up the freezer. And it's a shame, and it's also quite dangerous to lose those skills. When you think about it, you're not very far from hunting and gathering again. If you have no skill, no knowledge, and all of a sudden you don't have any source of fresh food. So drying is all well and good. It's a bit boring. Some things are all right dried, but we want some nice things in our life. And into play came nature's 3 natural preservatives. And this is what we still use today. And it's all we use. We don't have a whole array of packets and things that we use. We use a combination, or in isolation, the 3 natural preservatives, which are vinegar, which occurs naturally. It makes itself. If you leave any kind of alcohol around, beer, ale, cider, that kind of thing, it will make itself into vinegar with the reaction with air. If it's open to the air, it will create vinegar. And to create a situation where it is the right acidity to preserve food indefinitely is another natural miracle, as far as I'm concerned. You'll see, I get a bit hyper excited after a while over all this. Salt, absolutely vital to life and vital to the preservation of food. I use sea salt pretty much all of the time, or I might use a rock salt, depending on the situation. And probably the one you'll be most familiar with in terms of a rock salt is the Himalayan pink salt. But there's rock salt that you put into salt grinders and things like that. And I sometimes use that. I tend not to use the table salt, the fine ground table salt, because that has other additives that are put into it to make it free flowing and all the rest of it. And then there's sugar, dear old sugar, much maligned. This happens to be the UK brand Tate and Lyle. I try not to use this if possible. When I first started out, I made decisions for my preserving life, what I would do, what I would use, and I made the decision to use UK sugar made from sugar beet. Unfortunately, the harvest was decimated in 2020, I think, and they're still trying to sort of catch up with the production. The sugar beet brands in this country are Silver Spoon and Whitworth's, but at the moment, Tate and Lyle is predominating because that is made from sugar cane, and that is imported and involves lots of fuel and all the rest of it. But depending on where you are in the world, this will be your local sugar. And I don't actually, I'm not the preserving police. I mean, if you want to use a brand, you're buying on price, or you're buying because you want an unrefined sugar, you know, fine. Sugar is sugar. And in the UK, sugar, actual sucrose, is the only sweetener, shall we say, that has the legal definition of sugar. But I will talk a bit in a minute about processed food. And we've got to the situation now, when I first started, it was illegal to use the term sugar for anything other than sucrose, the crystal sugar in the bag. But that's not the case now. People put sugar on everything and they use it as a blanket term. However, we'll talk about that in a second. So when we're preserving, we reduce the moisture content, and mostly by cooking, which is what we're going to do today. And once you've reduced it sufficiently, you then add in your preservative, which in this case is only sugar. We don't need the vinegar and the salt. If you're making pickles, you might use all of them, but not cook the ingredients. Let's say take pickled onions, for instance. You would soak them in salt overnight. You would put lots of salt on them, you peel them, prep them, put them in a bowl, cover them with salt, and the salt draws out the moisture, lowering the moisture content. Then when you come to pickle them, you rinse them off quickly. They look a bit like when you've been in the bath too long and all your fingers go wrinkly, and that's all good. And then you replace that moisture with the vinegar. Vinegar for pickling and preserving needs to be at least 5% acetic acid. And in the UK, if it has vinegar printed on the bottle or the container, it must be 5% because it is so important for the preservation of food. If you see something called non-brewed condiment, that is just a vinegar tasting condiment that you can safely put on your chips, but you can't preserve food with it. So steer clear of those, however cheap they are. Nowadays, we're very, very lucky. We can get these big containers of vinegar quite economically. And I would suggest to you that with your vinegar and your sugar, you need to be buying that more or less every time you shop. You never know when you're going want to preserve something, when somebody might give you something or you see a bargain. If you've got the basic preservatives stored, you know that you can just get going when you get home. So be buying your sugar bit by bit and storing it away somewhere. It's the only ingredient that doesn't have any use by, sell by, best before dates on it, because it lasts forever. That's what it brings to the preserving party. It never changes. The only time it will change is if it gets damp, and then it will just stick itself all together in a lump. But it's still good to use. I could keep that packet for 30 years and I could use it and it would be absolutely fine. And it wouldn't have lost any of its properties. It would still do what it does every time. So I'm going to put these aside for the moment because they're probably a discussion for another day in depth. I'm going to stick with the sugar. As I've said, I do get battered about the amount of sugar that is used in preserves. We've got a kilo of fruit we're going to use later, and we're going to use a kilo of sugar. And making jam is more like a chemical reaction, really. It's not so much cooking. And we need the jam to set. If we want to keep it for a long time, we need it to set. And we all know what jam is like when it's set. And some of us know what it's like when it isn't set, but that's hopefully not going to happen. So there are recipes, there are tried and tested ways of doing things. And I'm a traditionalist in flavour, and also I stick to those rules. I could mess about with the amount of sugar, but really the amount I would have to take out for it to make any difference nutritionally, I would just be stewing some fruit, really. You know, it's best to stick to the rules, make the jam, get it to set, and then it has its keeping qualities. So what happens is you drive off the moisture and you need several things for good jam. Is my lemon gone? You need very fresh fruit, because the fresher the fruit is, the higher the level of pectin. And pectin in fruit, in any plant, is a starch. Happily, the fruits of a plant have the most pectin, but grass has pectin, tree bark has pectin, all plant cells have pectin. But we utilize that, the high levels of pectin in the fruit, which reacts with acid, and it may have enough acid in the fruit naturally, and the sugar. And the catalyst for all of that to create the set is heat. And you have to have a high heat. That's what you've heard people talking about, rolling boils and all that kind of thing. You do have to achieve that, and you do have to maintain it. And we will do that. You will see all of that for yourself. But when you're beginning, when you're starting out, I would suggest that you use the juice of a lemon per kilo of fruit, just to be on the safe side. It won't change the flavour of your jam, but it will give you a bit of an insurance blanket that everything is going to be fine, or as fine as it can be. There are things that can go wrong, but generally speaking, if you stick to the rules and the chemical reaction thing, then you'll be fine. So we're going to put in our kilo of sugar and the juice of a lemon, heat it, and make some lovely jam. And that's it. And you'll see that it will take you sort of 20 minutes to half an hour tops. I think everybody has the view that making preserves is long-winded and hot, and everybody else has to go out for the day and have a lovely day out, and you're stuck in the kitchen and making jam. It's not like that at all. And these days, I've said freezing and refrigerators don't come into it. They come into it in the storage of anything that you might want to extend the life of until you can preserve it. But the preservation bit of it is at ambient temperature on the shelf. Now, the sugar, I want to just talk about that a little bit, because at the moment we're in this ridiculous state where everybody's trying to take sugar out of everything. And as I said to you, this is the only sugar that goes into preserves. It doesn't go into processed food. if you see sugar on the back of a ingredient list, on the back of a packet, it won't be this. You imagine a factory trying to handle all this loose sugar and keeping it, so it doesn't clog up the tubes and the pipes of all the machinery and everything that go into making the processed food. I don't know if you've seen some of the Greg Wallace inside the factory programs. You can see how automated it is, and you only need a bit of a lumpy delivery and the whole thing will grind to a halt. Not only that, it takes up a lot of room and it's expensive. The food industry has substituted sugar for high fructose corn syrup, which is made from a waste product, basically the corn stalks that are cut off from harvesting the corn. And that will be apparent in a minute. That they can make the high fructose corn syrup from this waste, and it is unbelievably cheap, and it's used throughout the Western world in processed food production. The only problem is that this has been around being used by people in medicines and in preserves since before the birth of Christ. Now, I believe that if it had been fundamentally bad for us, then we wouldn't all be here today. We would have suffered a long time ago, and it would have been identified as the problem, which it isn't. Chemically, sugar is equal glucose and fructose molecules, which the body can metabolize, it can digest it, and actually, how much do we actually eat in a helping of jam or whatever it is? However, the high fructose corn syrup is, as the name suggests, it has an unequal glucose fructose molecule, and that is what causes many of our Western illnesses today, because we can't metabolize it. And I haven't got time to go into all the details, but mainly it's highly addictive. So it's great for food processing because it's a syrup, so it makes everything go through all the machinery fantastically easily, including things like pizza bases and savory foods, breads, all those kinds of things. But because it's so sweet, it then has to have a lot of salt added to make the flavor correct. So you've got a double whammy of a highly addictive artificial sugar and a high loading of salt, which isn't ideal. And that is the case for every processed food. If you want a book to explain it, the processed food industry, I recommend this book. I don't benefit from it at all, but it's not an easy read. But I think if you do manage to get through it, you won't ever buy or eat processed food again. UPF, ultra processed food, these days is recognised as being the biggest threat to health of the Western world. And I would just show you briefly one illustration of that. You might wonder what this box of Honey Monster cereal is doing on the table. And it's nothing to do with preserving, but it's everything to do with I don't know, it's sort of like a falseness of claims and everything, that everything is dressed up to look like something which it isn't. To start with, psychologically, food packaged in blue and yellow packets is supposed to be more attractive, to make us want to buy them. I don't know why, but apparently that's the case. And we use the traffic light system in the UK, as which we're familiar with. Green is good, very, very good. Orangey colour, not quite so good. Red, too much sugar. Want to avoid that. And you'll notice this packet has no red on it. No red, only the name, but not in the traffic lights. And the strap line at the bottom says wheat puffs with a dash of honey. So it implies that it's just wheat with a little bit of honey to make it nice for you and your children to eat. It's got the honey monster, it's got bees, and it's got games on the back with bees and telling you how lovely bees are. And we all know that bees are very important and everything like that. But it's creating a sort of an aura of, we've made this product that just uses the honey from lovely bees. Okay, so we'll have a look at the ingredients. And taking the largest, the first ingredient is always the largest and it works down to the smallest, okay? So we've got puffed wheat is 62.5%, which you would expect. So, but just over half of this box is the puffed wheat, okay? So the next ingredient is glucose syrup. And the next ingredient is sugar, which may well be the case. They may be using some sugar. I don't know. But that is 13%. So the glucose syrup, which is also a sweetener, is higher than 13%. So you've got glucose syrup is one sweetener. You've got sugar, that's 2. The honey is 3.6%. It is a dash of honey. You know, it's only just about in there. So that's 3 sweeteners. The next thing is soluble glucofiber. Now that sounds good, doesn't it? Fiber's good for us. We like fiber. And I never knew what soluble glucofiber was. So I looked it up and it's made by Tate and Lyle. And it turns out it's a waste product from, because you know sugar is refined from sugar cane. So they chop everything up to make a fiber. And that itself, as it breaks down in your body, is a sugar. But it's not a sugar that you have to declare on the front of the packet because it's not deemed to be a sugar. An illustration of that is if you've got some whole wheat bread and you don't put anything on it, but you just chew it, after a time, don't swallow it, just keep chewing. And after a while, it starts to taste really sweet. And that's the property that they're using in this product to make it more sweet without adding sugar that they have to declare. So that's 4 sugars. Then there are stabilizers, which is calcium carbonate, which is chalk. Caramelized sugar syrup, so that's 5 sugars. Sunflower oil to make it glossy. Vitamins and minerals are added in, and that's it. So there's 5 actual sugars in this product, but there is 7% actually declared as sugar itself in a serving, which makes it very acceptable. And the advertising that goes along with this product is equally vague and sort of all airy-fairy bees, and you know, you may have seen it on the television. I wrote this, emailed this advertising standards agency and complained that this was misrepresented, what was actually in the box. And they just, and I said, for busy parents rushing around with children in a shopping trolley and grabbing things to, you know, they end up with something that isn't what it purports to be. And they just said all the ingredients are on the box, and that was it. So I'm just saying, learn about labeling and be aware. The other thing I've got on the table here is some Colgate toothpaste. Now, I haven't talked about artificial sweeteners much, but there are a whole range of them, and anything ending in ol is called sugar alcohol. That doesn't mean it's got alcohol in it, or it's just a processing thing, and they're all made artificially from chemicals. So you may have heard of sorbitol and xylitol, things like that. Now this is toothpaste designed for 0 to 2 years. So this is to use on babies, basically, who have no teeth, and it's to get them used to the feel of the toothbrush and all the rest of it. Actually, I'm being, you know, a bit hard hitting here, but actually I think it's to get them used to sweet tastes from the get-go. A baby isn't born knowing what sweet is. It learns what sweet is. And this toothpaste contains sodium fluoride, sorbitol, that's one sweetener, artificial sweetener, various gums and so on. And it also has sodium saccharin, another artificial sweetener, both of which in excess, and I'm not talking much excess, and bearing in mind this is a baby with you know, the body's systems aren't developed fully, both of those cause diarrhea. So that's another happy circumstance. But the whole point being, it doesn't need to be in here, but these are products, you'll find all these artificial sweeteners, these addictive sweeteners in baby yogurts, baby products, children's, things aimed at children, all the ice cream sauces, ice cream itself, everything. And really what we strip it down to, those people who were with me last year, you know how few ingredients you have to make these products. The rest is all either processing aids or things to make you want to buy it again and eat it again. So just be very careful. You know, I just think this sort of thing's shocking, really. But I'm not trying to unduly influence you. I'm just trying to make you aware, and for you to understand why I am so passionate about growing as much as I can for ourselves, buying well, buying locally from local producers who know about what food they're producing. Buying a farm box for vegetables and things like that. We go and get milk from the farm, from the, you know, the machines they have now, and then all the food that I preserve for myself. So we don't really eat processed food at all. And I'm just saying it can be done. It sounds like it's impossible, but it isn't. It's quick, it's easy, and you're right back there in control. So let's lighten the mood and make some jam. So those of you that are cooking with me, if you want to sort of get ready, your fruit, if you have fresh raspberries, you can just tip them into your pan, whatever pan you're using. Make sure it's a big pan. You might not have this shaped jam pan yet, and until you're really hooked on preserving, I would say don't bother, just use the biggest pan you've got, but don't make it a sort of Le Creuset iron type pan, because there's too much heat stored in the pan and you can't kind of regulate it enough. So if you've got fresh raspberries, you don't need to wash them. We don't want them all wet. We're trying to get rid of moisture. It will be cooked so hot that anything that is on the fruit, you know, will be annihilated. So put your raspberries in the pan. I'm using frozen raspberries, but they have thawed out a bit, and turn the heat on. Then you need to get your lemon and cut it in half around the middle. And then we're going to squeeze the juice to add to the raspberries. Got my lemon squeezer here. Other questions I haven't answered, probably. I'll get back to them in a minute when I'm waiting for the raspberries to cook. Right, that's one half, and that's going to go in. The other half. Then just quickly, I've got my jar here. If you squeeze lemons, but you don't use the zest for anything, just don't put them in the bin. They've got so much goodness in the skin. You can see in the lemon skin here, all these little sort of pitted bits are where all the citrus oil is. So you need to make sure that we use that. How hot? Well, put it on, I've got mine on 4, but I'll probably turn it up in a bit, Rachel. So sort of slightly more than halfway. If they're frozen still, then just let the juice run a bit before you put the heat right up, because otherwise they'll just sort of stick on the metal. So the easiest thing I find when I've squeezed a lemon like this, but it might be that you're having a gin and tonic and you've cut slices from the middle and you haven't got any use for the rest of it. It's far too valuable a resource to just put in the bin or the compost. It's highly antibacterial and also full of goodness, which we'll talk about when we get to the marmalade class in the winter workshops. So the easiest thing I do, I've got some white vinegar in here, distilled malt vinegar in my jar, and I pop in the lemon shells. Now, if you can't get organized with a jar and vinegar and so on, just put them in a bag and put them in the freezer, and you can keep adding to them, and then you can add them to your marmalades or that kind of thing. But please don't just throw them away. So we put them in there in the vinegar and we keep adding to them. And after they've been in there a couple of weeks, this will all have turned yellow, the vinegar, and then you can dilute it 50-50 with water, put it into a spray bottle and use it to clean your surfaces, your mirrors, your sinks, your bathroom basins and so on, and shower. It's very, very good cleaner that isn't abrasive and it isn't it hasn't got any chemicals in it. So let's start at the top of the questions. Alcohol is kind of a preservative, but it goes along with the syrup usually, Elizabeth. Is cider vinegar okay to use for the lemons? Actually, any vinegar is okay to use, but I use the distilled one so that people can see the effect and they can see the colour come out, because that is all the citrus oil that is in those little dimples on the skin. There are other ways of preserving the skin, which we will cover eventually, but for now, that's your quickest and easiest and most useful thing to do with them, which doesn't take any work. All you've got to do is fill up the jar, then strain out the vinegar and put it in a bottle. That's it. So, and you can save a lot of money on having a bathroom cleaner and a kitchen cleaner and why have we got to have a different sprays for everywhere? And it's not good for your chest and your children's breathing and so on, with all these sprays with their propellants in them and so on. So this is starting to cook. If you've got fresh raspberries, the frozen raspberries tend to be more broken, so they don't have to cook down quite so much. If you've got fresh raspberries, they just need to cook until they look cooked. There's no kind of scientific thing to it. As you can see, the steam is coming off, and that's what we want. And this is why we have wide pans, is so that the biggest surface area can disperse the moisture quickest. And it means you don't have to cook the fruit for a long time. But if you've got a tall, a big pan that's got straight sides, that's fine. And you've got a spoon, that's all you need. It just means it might take a little bit longer to actually put down. I'm just going to get the cloth to wipe my mat. And I'm going to ask you to do something you might think sounds a bit weird, but those of you who are cooking, if you now sort of put your face over the pan and take a big sniff, and you will get that lovely fresh raspberry. Whoa, it's lovely, you know, the raspberry flavor. It's completely natural, and because that's all there's in there. It's just raspberries. So I'm going to measure my sugar, and I need 1 kilo of sugar because I had 1 kilo of raspberries. It's important to have the equal quantity. As soon as you alter that down, as soon as you take sugar out, the danger is that you will not achieve the set, and then you will have to keep it in the fridge. You haven't made jam and it won't keep. So I personally don't see the point. But if you want to make sort of stewed raspberries with a bit of sugar in, that's what you're doing, but it's not jam. Okay, now I'm going to open this carefully. We always get that bit of sugar at the top, and I'm told, I think it was Mr. Tate made his machinery to make that sugar be there just to annoy housewives. Jolly well does. There's no need for it apparently, and I don't know why they still do it. Anyway, so measure 1 kilo. We've got our acid in there, our lemon. And you can see it's sort of bubbling away nicely, and there's juice and there's bits of fruit. So the thing to do is to lift your pan off of the heat, just briefly, onto a heat mat while you add your sugar. Being careful not to burn yourself on the uncovered hob. So just tip it all in. You don't have to add it all gradually, sort of crystal by crystal. Just tip it in and then give it a good stir. It won't all dissolve at once. And Trev has the camera here and you can hear it. All gritty. And you can feel it as well with your spoon. Now, before we start trying to make the jam, that sugar needs to be dissolved. So you stir it as much as you can, but there is a point where it won't dissolve anymore. So you put it back on the heat and you continue to stir while it heats up and melts and dissolves into the fruit juices. It's very important that you do dissolve the sugar. If you don't, because sugar is a crystal, if it's stored undissolved in the jam, you know from being at school, in primary school, we used to grow crystals in jars and so on, it will grow more crystals. And when you eat your jam, you will have a kind of crunchy lump that you'll come across, and it won't hurt you. It isn't off or anything like that, but it's not that pleasant to have sort of crunchy jam really. So you need to dissolve it thoroughly. And you may notice that now you've put the sugar in, your raspberry mixture is now very, very glossy, and that is the sugar has done that, and it's gone darker as well. So we have another question. Why do you take it off the heat to add the sugar rather than throwing the sugar into the pot on the stove? Because depending on the kind of pan you've got, if you've just got a pan that is just metal, it could burn straight onto the bottom of the pan. The jam pans, the proper preserving pans, have an encapsulated base, which is a sandwich of stainless steel with copper in the middle, and it distributes the heat very evenly. So in actual fact, I do just that when I'm making myself, you know, when I'm doing it on my own, then I just chuck it in on the hob because I know it will be fine. But I can't tell you to do that because I don't know what equipment you're using. And trust me, burnt sugar on a pan is not something you want to be dealing with. So whilst that's just cooking a bit more, should I mash the raspberries up a bit? No, they'll do that on their own, Megan. They'll by the time you've finished, it will all be, and it's nice to find the odd raspberry, I think, as well. You know, if it doesn't, they'll all be cooked. Just let them, before you put the sugar in, just let them, you know, cook down so it's all, the juices are all running and everything. Do we keep stirring until it's like this? Now I'll stir it again. You remember you could hear it before. Now it's all smooth. I can't feel it and I can't hear it. All I can hear is the spoon on the pan. All that crunchiness is gone. I'll stop talking and you can listen. Okay, so at this point you stop stirring. Let's just get my saucer, which I've forgotten to get. And if you have a look at it, and if you put your head over the pan again and have another sniff, you will see that the mixture looks very much more like jam in colour. It's darker and it smells different from how you smelt it before with the fresh raspberries and the juice. Now it smells sort of toasty and you can smell the sugar, a bit like candy floss when they make candy floss. So it does change. It's now starting to, the heat is starting to come up. Once your sugar is dissolved, you don't stir it because stirring cools it down. And actually what we want now is to get the heat up, to get that chemical reaction of the sugar, the fruit, the pectin in the fruit, the acid and the heat. And so if you keep stirring, it's going to cool down. I've got it on 5 now. I've turned it up a bit. It's not on the maximum. And once it's started to get that rolling boil, I'm going to time it. So if you've got a timer or you can do it on your phone, once you've got, I'll show you the rolling boil. And once you've got yours to that stage, you need to time it for 6 minutes. That's all. Don't worry about any foam that appears. We don't, in my world, have anything that's called scum, which some people know, but I call it foam. It's foam from the sugar, and at the end we'll disperse that. You don't need to worry about doing anything with it at the moment. So you can see it coming up to, it needs to be evenly boiling like that across the surface. I'm just going to see if I can put my timer on. I'm going to put the kitchen one on as well as backup. It's on 6 at the moment, so that's fine. Heating it very evenly. So you can see the bubbles are getting faster and more widespread across the surface of the pan. And it's called the rolling boil because the bubbles keep coming up, turning over, and then more appear and turn over, and it's sort of a constant movement. See there. Right, I'm going to put my timer on. You put yours on when you think yours looks like mine. Actually, that one's gone off again now, so we use that one. And during this time, you need to just use a figure of 8 with the spoon. You don't want to be stirring it down, but you can just gently move it around like that just to make sure nothing is sticking. Now, raspberries are very well behaved and there isn't usually a problem. But things, stone fruits like plums and apricots, things like that, you have to stay with it and make sure that you regulate the heat accurately. If somebody comes to the door now, you know, you have an Amazon delivery or somebody phones up, then just take the pan off the heat and put it on the heat mat and turn the heat off on your hob and deal with whatever it is. You might have children that you need to attend to or something. Don't leave it cooking unattended. You can go back to it and start again, start the boiling process again. It's not ideal, but it's better than leaving it on the heat, getting distracted and coming back and finding everything's burnt. When you make any kind of preserve, if it doesn't turn out exactly like you think it should be, the only thing that you need to get rid of as being no good is something you've burnt. Everything else you can find a use for. And just bear in mind, this will never be, nor should it be, like the jam you buy in the supermarket. This has raspberries, lemon juice and sugar. If you look at the ingredients on the supermarket jam, I would be disappointed if your jam was like that. So be prepared for quite a shocking increase in flavour and vibrancy and so on in your jams. It is quite different. Rachel says she can see my plate isn't in the fridge. Is this a Rosie secret? Well, it is a bit. I mean, it's cold. I don't put it in the fridge because as soon as you bring it out of the fridge into a warm room, or when you put the jam on it, the warmth of the jam creates condensation, and that's exactly what you don't want. You can't get the sort of accurate reading, if you like. So I have it at room temperature, which is cool. I'm going to use it to test the jam, and then we may or may not put it in the fridge, depending on how it looks. All you're trying to do is replicate quickly what is going to happen in the jar. You want some idea of what's going on. And I've never used a thermometer because, generally speaking, they're not good enough quality to read accurately. The digital ones are better, but I've never got into the habit of using it, so I just do it this way. Megan says it looks like it's got a skin on it. Well, so does mine, Megan. It's fine. Don't worry about that. We've got 2 minutes to go. It smells amazing now, and that's what it will taste like. So let's move things out of the way. Don't need. My jars here, which are all prepped ready. I don't do them in the oven while we're teaching like this because the oven makes a noise, but you can wash them, rinse them and put them in a warm oven before you start making the jam. Then by the time you've made it, they'll be ready to use. The main thing is that they're dry. They must be dry. Don't use them if they're wet, because that's where you get mold in jam if moisture gets back into it. The whole thing is us trying to keep the moisture level down. And the reason we all have moldy jam as kids, or I did because I'm ancient, is because our parents only had cellophane covers and wax discs, and cellophane is porous, so the moisture that we got taken out of it went back in again, because we didn't have centrally heated homes that were stored over the winter in a damp house, and then by the time we came to use it, it had a nice little mouldy hat on. But that isn't what we're aspiring to. Nearly there, 40 seconds. And you can see these bubbles very dense across the surface, and that's what we're looking for. Right, there we are. I'm going to take mine off and put it on my mat again. And I'm going to put some on my saucer before I do anything else. Leave it there. Right, so you can see on the top there is this foam from the sugar. Now, anything that's stuck to the side of the pan, leave that there, because that's cooked on, and it will be cooked harder than what's on the surface. But now, while we're waiting for the set test, you can just stir that foam backwards and forwards as quickly as you like, and you should be able to disperse most of it. If there's any sort of lumps left, you can just lift those off. But you don't want to be taking off a saucer full of foam that you just end up putting in the bin, because that's all jam. Because you can see, just doing that quickly is pretty much all gone in. And it's, as I say, it's only like foam, like candy floss. It's just from the sugar. There we are, and that looks the color of jam. It smells like jam. It doesn't look like jam. It's runny. Doesn't look very promising, but we're going to leave that there for a second or two while I tell you about the jars. If your jam in the pan looks like jam, then you've overcooked it. You've cooked out too much moisture by trying to get it to look like jam, and it's a common mistake with beginners. They think, oh, it's far too runny, I'll keep cooking it, I'll keep cooking it, and then you end up, by the time it's cold, it's like glue, and that isn't jam. What you're looking for is a nice gelled set. So I've got my jars here, which I'm going to put on my mat. This is equivalent, this is a 200 ml jar, which is equivalent to sort of 8 ounces, which I find is a nice size for jam. It's not too big, and if you want to give some to somebody, you're not giving a great big jar that, you know, they have more of your jam than you do. So think on, Rachel, for your mum. I use a funnel. They're inexpensive, and they save so much time in cleaning up and wastage. If you haven't got a funnel, ladle it into a jug and pour it from the jug. Otherwise, trying to ladle it straight into a jar is, believe me, not successful. What do you? Oh, sorry, I thought it was another question. So, and see if this is set in a moment. I've got my lids here as well. The modern lids are different to how they used to be. They don't have a thread. They have what are called lugs, and those lugs fit on to these bits of glass here. This isn't a thread, it doesn't go continuously around the jar. So when you put the lid on, you catch it onto one of those bits of glass and just twist it until it stops. Don't keep turning it like this, otherwise those lugs will strip out and the lid will be useless. They have a PVA seal around the inside there, which goes down onto the top of the jar, and it gets pulled down tight onto the jar as the jam cools, and that's what creates the seal and stops things getting out and things getting in, which is why you can keep the jam for such a long time. I'll explain about the gap in a moment. And these lids are also acid proof as well, so if you're making pickles with vinegar or chutney with vinegar, then these are safe to use. I'll get my ladle. Now, you can test yours on your saucer. I haven't put it in the fridge, so I don't know if this is going to, as I said, what you're trying to do is replicate what's going to happen in the jar once it's all cooled down. So this is very thin and isn't hot now, it's just mildly warm. So using your little finger, like a little snow plow, don't push it with the end of your finger because you won't be able to see enough. If you push it from one side away from you, you can see the desired crinkle. Now that's still slightly warm, so it isn't really stiff, but that crinkle is enough to indicate that when it's cold it will be fine. My jars aren't warm now because, as I say, I don't have the oven on while I'm filming because it makes a noise, but if your jars are warm, that's the ideal. The main thing is though that they're dry. Is that okay, Rachel? Now if you go back to your pan, you will see I couldn't put my hand into that pan. It is blisteringly hot, but this is the chemical reaction. This is the wonder of it. If I go with my spoon like I did with my finger, you can see the surface is already setting. And that is just a sort of comfort blanket for you to see that. That's fine. As you are jarring up, just keep giving it a little mix, otherwise you end up with this uneven. It's sort of set on the top, but not on the bottom, if you see what I mean. So get your funnel right up to your pan, get your ladle, or if you're using a jug, fill the jug and start ladling it in. Now, if you're using a funnel, you need to be looking down the funnel. You don't look at the side of the jar while you're doing it and try and do this because it will go all over the place. And that you need to fill it so that the jam just comes up into the cup of the funnel. When you lift the funnel out, oh, that's just on the edge. That's fine. It's right at the top of the jar, and that you don't need it perhaps quite as high as that, but that you certainly need it to the top of the jar. You don't want any gap at all at the top. This is very hot. That one will actually shrink back while I fill the others, so I'm not too worried about it. If you overfill into your funnel, sometimes you're not thinking about what you're doing, don't lift the funnel out, just take your ladle across very gently and lift out the excess. Otherwise it will, as soon as you lift the funnel, it'll go all over the table. So let me take that one out. That's right to the top, perfectly filled. And then you put the lid on, twist it to its finger tight onto the lugs, and then you leave it. As it cools, it will shrink. It will then leave a gap at the top of the jar, but the lid's on, so it's fine, and that gap is a vacuum. Nothing can grow in a vacuum in terms of mold or anything like that. and nothing can get in or out because the lid will be held down tightly onto the rim of the jar by the vacuum. That is the wonder of the modern jar. I don't care how many times you reuse your jars, as long as they're not chipped or you haven't used them for mustard or something, you know, keep your jars for what you want to put in them, because they do retain a smell, as I'm sure you know from some coffee jars and things like that. You can use them over and over and over again, but do make sure you have good lids that are in good condition. If they sort of buckle or rust or anything, then get some new ones. Sorry, I'm losing my voice now. They're only a few pence each, and they are the barrier between you and the outside world, or the jam and the outside world. So I'm going to carry on filling in a moment. I hope that's been useful and that you have good overview and that you have ended up with some lovely jam, which you can enjoy, and maybe come along to some of the other workshops which start on the 2nd of February, covering all sorts of subjects. Last year's workshops are available in the library of the school. Some of them are free, some of them are pay to view. You can look through the subjects and you'll see and hear just what we did in the class. They're not edited at all. Probably that's not a good thing, but they're there and you know, available. The recipe, now we've got the oh, can't reach it, pantry notebook produced, which is month by month. It's continuous, so there's no year on it, so you can make notes from year to year. You can put your own recipes into it. You can store the workshop recipes. When you print them out now, there's a guide on there for you to cut round, and they fit into the notebook. And it's a good resource. It's got lots of information in it and some more recipes and other things to do. And then there's some supplementary pages coming along for each month as well. Do join the Facebook group, the Rosie's Preserving School group. You'll find people like you there, and we all share things. Doesn't matter, it can be funny and silly, or it can be useful, or you, like I've had the last couple of days, people that have made things and sent me pictures. I post them in the group for other people to see. There's a reading list, and there's some guides as well of different techniques. So I hope you enjoy your jam. Let me know, and hopefully see you again. Thank you.